There are men who will drive around for 20 minutes completely lost before rolling down the window to ask for directions. Others will spend hours trying to fix something they've never repaired before, and some carry problems that are slowly destroying them inside for years, without telling a single person. Curiously, almost all of them say the same thing: I can handle it myself. But what if that answer was never really yours? What if long before you learned how to solve problems, you had already learned that asking for help meant failure? Stay until the end, because this video isn't about pride. It's about an invisible rule that millions of people continue to obey without even realizing it exists. And once you discover it, you'll probably begin to understand many of the decisions you've made throughout your life. There's an idea that we rarely question. We believe that the most important decisions we make are conscious choices, but the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." In other words, many of our decisions feel like free choices when, in reality, they're driven by beliefs we've repeated for years without ever examining them. And that's exactly what happens when it comes to asking for help, because no one sits an 8-year-old child down and says, "Never ask for help." No one hands them a rule book. And yet, they learn it anyway. They learn it when they fall down and hear, "Get up, you're fine." They learn it when they cry and someone says, "Boys don't cry." They learn it by watching their father, grandfather, or uncle carry a burden that is clearly too heavy. Without asking anyone for assistance, nobody has to explain it, because some lessons are never taught with words, they're taught through examples, and repeated examples eventually become invisible rules. Rules that one day stop feeling like opinions and begin to feel like part of who you are. Here's where the first major problem begins. Most people think they avoid asking for help because of pride, but psychology suggests something very different. What you're really protecting isn't your pride, it's your self-image. Without realizing it, you've spent years building a dangerous equation. Asking for help. I'm not enough. Once an idea like that settles into your mind, it stops being an opinion. It becomes a threat. That's why some people would rather suffer in silence than say 3 simple words: I need help. Not because they don't want support, but because their brain interprets that moment as a loss of personal worth. And here's something fascinating. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But he also warned that many people end up living according to values they never truly chose. They simply inherited them. And perhaps that's exactly what's happening here. Maybe you never consciously decided that asking for help was weakness. Maybe you simply inherited that belief from a world where appearing strong seemed more important than expressing how you felt. For generations, especially for men, personal value became associated with 3 verbs: solve, protect, endure, without showing cracks. For a long time, that way of living seemed admirable, and in some situations, it truly was necessary. But every strategy that works in one era can become a problem when the world changes. And here we arrive at one of modern psychology's most interesting discoveries. When you think about asking for help, your brain doesn't process only the need. It processes a threat. It doesn't hear, "I need support." It hears, "They're going to discover I can't do this." Psychologists call this a perceived threat to social status. In other words, the fear that other people will change the way they see us. That explains why someone may have no problem asking for directions, but struggles to admit they're emotionally exhausted. Because the more important the issue is, the more threatened their identity feels. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. The real problem isn't refusing help once. The real problem begins when refusing help becomes a way of life. Eventually, you stop seeing the difference between being independent and being completely alone, and that difference can change the course of an entire life. Here's a question almost nobody asks. If asking for help is such a natural part of being human, why do so many people feel ashamed to do it? The answer lies in a contradiction we've carried for centuries. Since childhood, we're taught that community matters. We're told to work as a team, to share, to cooperate. Yet, at the very same time, many people also grow up hearing another much quieter message. If you want something done right, do it yourself. Don't depend on anyone. Handle your own problems. Little by little, these stop being simple pieces of advice. They become the way a person measures their own value. So when the moment comes to ask for help, it no longer feels like asking a question. It feels like putting your identity on trial. And this is where psychology offers a fascinating explanation. When a person believes their image is under threat, the brain activates defense mechanisms remarkably similar to those triggered by physical danger. Not because the danger is real, but because for thousands of years, being rejected by your group could mean losing your protection. Our brains evolved to survive within communities, even today. They still react as though losing social acceptance were a threat to survival itself. That's why asking for help often doesn't hurt. What hurts is imagining what other people might think. Carl Jung devoted much of his life to a concept he called the persona, the mask we present to the world so we'll be accepted. We all wear one. The competent professional, the strong father, the woman who can handle everything, the friend who never falls apart. The problem begins when that mask stops being a tool and becomes a prison. Eventually, you no longer know who you are without it. Then something strange happens. You begin hiding your exhaustion, your sadness, your fears, not because they don't exist, but because admitting them feels like risking the image you've spent years building, and the more perfect that image appears, the harder it becomes to ask for help. The philosopher Seneca once wrote, "No wind is favorable for the sailor who doesn't know which port he's heading toward." Most people see this as advice about having goals. But there's another way to understand it. If your goal is to constantly prove you don't need anyone, you'll never find the right moment to ask for help, because every situation will feel like a defeat, and that's a battle you can never truly win. Psychologists have found something deeply concerning. Many people seek help only after the problem has become unbearable. They wait, they endure, they convince themselves tomorrow will be better, and when they finally speak, they've often been carrying that burden for months or even years. The saddest part is that the people around them often had no idea what was happening, because they'd become so good at hiding it. This is where we often confuse two very different ideas: strength and endurance. Endurance means continuing to carry a heavy load. Strength means knowing when that load needs to be shared. They are not the same thing. A bridge doesn't prove its strength by never receiving maintenance. It proves its strength because it was designed to remain standing for decades. To do that, it requires inspections, reinforcement, care. So why do we expect human beings to work differently? Why? Do we believe people should carry impossible burdens forever, when we'd never expect a steel bridge to do the same? Perhaps because we've confused silence with strength, but silence doesn't always protect us. Sometimes, it only delays the moment when the weight finally breaks us. And here's the greatest irony of all. Many people believe asking for help will make others respect them less, when in reality, the deepest relationships are often born the moment someone has the courage to say, "I can't do this alone," because trusting someone also requires courage. Accepting support requires strength, and recognizing your own limits demands far more maturity than pretending they don't exist. Perhaps the real question was never why some people refuse to ask for help. The real question is this: how many of the decisions you've made in your life were truly yours? And how many were made by an invisible rule you learned years ago and never dared to question? Because that rule wasn't born with you. Someone taught it to you. You repeated it for years. And one day, you stopped seeing it as an idea. You accepted it as the truth. But truths can also be re-examined, and perhaps the greatest sign of strength isn't carrying everything by yourself. Perhaps true strength is understanding that no one gets very far completely alone. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever avoided asking for help because you were afraid of looking weak or disappointing others? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone who's going through the very same thing today. If this video changed the way you understand human behavior, leave a like and subscribe to Human Behavior. Every week we explore psychology, philosophy, and human nature to better understand why we do what we do. I'll see you in the next video.